The private jet touched down just after midnight. Robert Kensington looked out the window at the twinkling city lights below, feeling both exhausted and relieved. 20 hours of travel had left him with sore muscles and a stiff neck, but closing the Singapore deal a day early made it all worthwhile. He hadn't even told his family he was coming home tonight. The surprise on their faces would make up for the jet lag. "We've landed, sir," his pilot announced over the intercom. "Your car is waiting on the tarmac." Robert gathered his briefcase and jacket. The deals he'd made this week would add another $100 million to his company's value. Not bad for a guy who started coding in his parents' garage 15 years ago. Sometimes he still couldn't believe how far he'd come. The cool night air hit his face as he stepped off the plane. His driver, Henry, stood beside the black Mercedes, door already open. "Welcome back, Mr. Kensington. Good trip?" "Very good," Robert replied, sliding into the leather back seat. "Take me home, please." "And Henry, let's go the scenic route. I need to clear my head before I see everyone." "Of course, sir." As the car pulled away from the airport, Robert loosened his tie and kicked off his expensive shoes. He had texts to answer and emails to check, but instead he just watched the city roll by. Skyscrapers gave way to upscale neighborhoods, which eventually turned into the exclusive gated community where he'd built his dream home 3 years ago. The house, more of a mansion, really, had been featured in architectural magazines and cost more than most people would earn in several lifetimes. 8 bedrooms, 10 bathrooms, an indoor pool, a home theater, and grounds so extensive it took a team of 5 gardeners to maintain them. Sometimes it felt too big, especially when he traveled so much, but his wife Lisa had wanted something impressive. "You've earned it," she'd said. "Henry, stop at the gate for a moment," Robert said as they approached his property. He noticed something odd. All the lights in the main house were on. Every single one. "At nearly 1 in the morning, is something wrong, sir?" Henry asked. Robert frowned. "Not sure. Lisa and the kids should be asleep by now. And Tom doesn't usually leave all the lights on." Tom was what Robert called Thomas, his head of household staff, though most people would just say butler. Robert had never liked that word, felt too stuffy. "Would you like me to call ahead?" Henry offered. "No," Robert decided. "Let's just go in. But drop me at the garden entrance. I'll walk up to the house." The car rolled through the gate after Robert punched in the security code. Henry drove him to the garden path that led to the main house and popped the trunk. "I'll take your bags to the service entrance, sir." "Thanks. Henry, good night." Robert stood in the cool night air, listening. That's when he heard it, music. Not loud, but definitely there. And voices. Many voices. His first thought was his teenage daughter, Zoe. Was she throwing a party while her mother was away visiting her sister? Lisa had left yesterday to help with the new baby, leaving Zoe with Tom's supervision. But this didn't sound like a teenage party. No thumping bass, no shouting. Robert walked quietly along the garden path, the perfectly trimmed hedges guiding his way toward the glow of the house. As he got closer, the music became clearer. Jazz, not pop music. Not Zoe's style at all. The massive windows of his home revealed a scene that stopped him in his tracks. The grand hall with its marble floors and sweeping staircase was filled with people. Not teenagers, adults. Well-dressed adults holding wine glasses and cocktails. At least 50 of them. And there, in the center of it all, stood Tom in a tuxedo, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to a small group. Tom, who had been with Robert's family for 7 years. Tom, who had a key to every room in the house, who knew all the security codes, who drove the kids to school when Robert was away on business. Tom, who Robert had trusted completely, Robert's hands clenched into fists. What was happening here? Was Tom using his house for some kind of event while he was gone? While Lisa was away? Had this happened before? For a moment, Robert considered calling the police. This was trespassing, maybe even theft depending on whose wine those people were drinking. But curiosity got the better of him. He wanted to see exactly what was going on before he made a scene. There was a side entrance to his study that few people knew about, a relic from the previous owner who'd apparently valued his privacy. Robert made his way there, unlocked it with his key, and slipped inside unnoticed. The sounds of the party were muffled in here. His study remained exactly as he'd left it. Leather-bound books lining the walls, his antique desk positioned to catch the morning light, family photos arranged precisely on the credenza. Nothing seemed disturbed. Robert moved silently through the darkened room to the door that connected to the main hallway. From there, He could access the upper balcony overlooking the grand hall. It would give him a perfect vantage point to observe whatever was happening. The hallway was empty, everyone apparently gathered downstairs. Robert climbed the sweeping staircase at the far end, keeping to the shadows. The music grew louder as he reached the top, a live jazz quartet playing in the corner of his grand hall. Who had hired them? Who was paying for all this? From the upper balcony, Robert could see everything. His anger grew as he surveyed the scene. People were making themselves at home in his house, sitting on his furniture, handling his possessions. He spotted several bottles from his wine cellar being poured freely. Some of those bottles cost thousands. But what really caught his eye was the temporary stage that had been set up at the far end of the hall. A podium stood there with what looked like a chart beside it. He couldn't make out what it showed from this distance. And then he saw Tom again, now making his way to the podium. The music stopped and Tom tapped on a microphone. The crowd quieted down. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tom began, his voice echoing through the grand hall. "Thank you all for coming tonight. I know many of you made significant adjustments to your schedules, and some of you traveled quite far to be here." Robert couldn't believe it. Tom spoke with such authority, as if this was his home, his event. "5 years ago," Tom continued, "when my son Alex was diagnosed, I didn't know where to turn. The medical bills alone would have ruined us. But thanks to Dr. Wilson and his team at the Children's Hospital, Alex not only survived, he thrived. Tom's son." Robert knew Tom had a boy, but he'd never mentioned any serious illness. He'd been a private person about his family life. "Tonight marks our 5th annual fundraiser," Tom said, gesturing to the chart beside him. "And I'm proud to announce that with your generosity, we've already reached 70% of our $1 million goal for the new pediatric cancer wing." Robert froze. "Fundraiser? Cancer wing? As you enjoy your evening, please remember to visit the silent auction tables in the East Wing. Every dollar goes directly to the hospital. Nothing is taken for administrative costs or overhead. And once again, I want to thank Mrs. Kensington for her support in allowing us to use this beautiful space, while she and Mr. Kensington are away." Lisa knew about this. His wife had given permission for this event without telling him. A well-dressed older woman approached the stage and took the microphone from Tom. "I'd like to add my thanks to Tom for organizing this event year after year. As the hospital board chair, I've seen firsthand how these funds have changed lives. Last year's donations purchased 3 new MRI machines that have already helped diagnose over 200 children." She gestured to a display that Robert hadn't noticed before. Photographs of children, some in hospital beds, others clearly in recovery. "These are the real beneficiaries of your generosity tonight." Robert's anger began to fade, replaced by confusion. This wasn't what he'd imagined at all. This wasn't Tom taking advantage of his absence. This was something else entirely. Robert moved closer to the railing, trying to get a better view of the photographs and the auction items. In doing so, he stepped into the light. A woman below happened to look up, saw him, and nudged her companion. Within seconds, a hush fell over the crowd as all eyes turned toward him. Tom looked up, and Robert would never forget the expression on his face, pure shock giving way to something like terror. The microphone slipped from Tom's hand, hitting the floor with a screech of feedback. "Mr. Kensington," Tom said, his voice barely audible without the microphone. You're home early." Every person in the grand hall stared at Robert, frozen in place, waiting to see what would happen next. The owner of the mansion had returned unexpectedly to find his home filled with strangers, and no one knew how he would react. The silence in the grand hall stretched uncomfortably as Robert stood at the balcony railing. 100 eyes stared up at him, waiting. He could feel their anxiety from here. The jazz quartet had stopped playing mid-song, and the musicians exchanged worried glances. One of the waitstaff nearly dropped a tray of champagne flutes. Robert slowly descended the stairs, his mind racing. This was clearly a charity event. That much was obvious now, but in his home, without his knowledge. Lisa might have approved it, but she hadn't mentioned a word to him. Why keep it secret? Tom met him at the bottom of the stairs, his normally confident posture now stiff with tension. Up close, Robert could see beads of sweat on the man's forehead. "Mr. Kensington," Tom said quietly, "I can explain everything." "I'm sure you can," Robert replied, keeping his voice low. "But not here, not now." The older woman who had been speaking, The hospital board chair approached them with a nervous smile. Mr. Kensington, what an unexpected pleasure. I'm Patricia Wilson, Children's Hospital Board Chair. Your home is absolutely stunning, and we're so grateful for your family's generosity in hosting our event. Robert forced a smile and shook her hand. Dr. Wilson, lovely to meet you. He'd picked up the doctor from Tom's earlier introduction. I apologize for interrupting. I wasn't aware the event was tonight. He could feel Tom's relief beside him. At least Robert wasn't making a scene, wasn't demanding everyone leave immediately. Please, Robert continued, addressing Dr. Wilson but speaking loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Don't let me interrupt. The fundraiser should continue. The tension in the room visibly eased. The quartet tentatively began playing again. Conversation slowly resumed. Robert turned to Tom, his expression now hardening. My study. Now. Tom nodded and followed Robert through the crowd. People parted to let them pass, some nodding politely at Robert, others quickly looking away. He caught snippets of whispered conversations. The actual owner didn't know he'd be here. Thought he was in Asia. The heavy oak door of Robert's study closed behind them with a solid thud, muffling the sounds of the party. Robert walked to his desk but didn't sit down. He turned to face Tom, who remained standing near the door looking like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. 7 years, Robert said quietly. 7 years you've worked for my family, Tom. I've trusted you with everything, my home, my children, my security. And this is what I find. Sir, please. No, let me finish, Robert said, raising a hand. I come home to find my house filled with strangers, my wine collection being poured freely, and you at the center of it all acting like you own the place. Tom's face flushed. I would never presume. Do you have any idea what went through my mind when I first saw all this? I thought you were taking advantage of my absence, using my home for your personal gain. I would never do that. Sir, never. Tom's voice was firm despite his obvious discomfort. Robert walked to the window, looking out at the garden now illuminated by the landscape lighting. How long has this been going on? This fundraiser? 5 years, sir. 5 years, Robert repeated, turning back to face Tom. And in all that time you never thought to mention it to me? Tom hesitated. Mrs. Kensington thought it would be better if you weren't involved. My wife thought it would be better. Robert couldn't hide his surprise. Why? Tom looked uncomfortable. She said you were too busy with work. That charity events weren't really your thing. The word stung more than Robert wanted to admit. Was that how Lisa saw him? Too busy for charity? Too focused on business to care about helping sick children? And your son? He was sick? Robert asked, his tone softening slightly. Tom nodded, his composure cracking for the first time. Leukemia, diagnosed when he was 6. The doctors at Children's Hospital saved his life. I had no idea, Tom. You never said anything. It wasn't relevant to my work, sir, and it was difficult to talk about. Robert ran a hand through his hair, suddenly feeling ashamed of his initial anger. So this fundraiser, you started it as a way to give back? Yes, sir. The first year was just a small gathering, mostly hospital staff and a few friends. We raised about $50,000. It was supposed to be a one-time thing, but it was so successful that Dr. Wilson asked if we could do it again the following year. And it grew from there? Yes, sir. Each year more people wanted to attend. More sponsors offered support. We've raised over $3 million for the pediatric oncology ward over the past 4 years. $3 million, Robert repeated, impressed despite himself. And tonight's goal is another $1 million? Yes, sir. For a new treatment wing. The hospital needs more space, more equipment. The waiting lists are too long. Tom's voice grew passionate. Children are waiting months for treatments they need immediately. Robert walked to the small bar in the corner of his study and poured himself a scotch. He offered one to Tom, who shook his head. Why my house, Tom? There must be other venues. It started because it was convenient. I was here, I knew the space. Mrs. Kensington suggested it when I mentioned wanting to do something for the hospital. Tom paused. But it became part of the appeal for donors. Your home is impressive, sir. People are willing to pay $5,000 per ticket just to see it, and we don't have to rent a venue, so all the money goes directly to the hospital. Robert took a long sip of his scotch, letting the information sink in. $5,000 per ticket. Looking at the crowd out there, that meant tonight's event had already raised at least $250,000 just in admission fees. And the wine? My collection? Tom looked genuinely apologetic. Mrs. Kensington approved it. We only use the bottles from the main cellar, not your private reserve, and we replace everything that's opened. Robert raised an eyebrow. With the same vintages. Some of those bottles are quite rare. Yes, sir. I keep detailed records. Mrs. Kensington provides a budget for replacements. Tom hesitated. Your wine collection is also part of the appeal. We charge extra for the premium selections, with those funds going directly to the hospital's emergency care fund. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Tom looked at Robert questioningly, and Robert nodded for him to answer it. Dr. Wilson stood there with a concerned expression. I'm sorry to interrupt, but some of the guests are getting worried. The auction is supposed to start in 15 minutes, and Tom usually makes the introductions. Robert made a split-second decision. Dr. Wilson, would you give us just 5 more minutes? Tom will be out shortly to continue with the event. She looked relieved. Of course, Mr. Kensington, and again, we're so grateful for your generosity. After she left, Robert turned back to Tom. I need to understand something. Why keep this from me? Did you really think I'd object to a charity fundraiser for sick children? Tom looked uncomfortable. It wasn't my decision, sir. Mrs. Kensington was quite specific. She said you wouldn't want the disruption, the strangers in your home. She said philanthropy was her department, not yours. The words hurt, but Robert suspected there was truth in them. When was the last time he'd attended a charity event that wasn't directly related to business? When had he last donated to a cause that didn't come with a tax write-off and good publicity for his company? I see, was all he said. Sir, about tonight, what would you like me to do? Should we end the event? Robert walked to the door and opened it slightly, looking out at the crowd. He could see the auction items displayed now, vacation packages, artwork, jewelry. People were examining them, already filling out bid sheets. In the corner, a group of hospital staff stood near a display of photographs. Children in hospital gowns, some with no hair, all smiling despite their circumstances. No, Robert decided. The fundraiser continues. He closed the door again and faced Tom. But I want to know everything. Show me what you've accomplished these past 5 years. Show me what tonight is funding. Relief washed over Tom's face. Of course, sir. I have all the documentation right here. He pulled a tablet from inside his jacket. We keep detailed records of every dollar raised and spent. For the next 10 minutes, Robert looked through the digital presentation as Tom explained the programs the fundraiser had supported. New medical equipment, a play area for young patients, a family support center, research initiatives. The results were impressive, the impact undeniable. And your son? How is he now? Robert asked as Tom finished his explanation. A genuine smile spread across Tom's face. Alex is 15 now, 5 years cancer-free. He's on the school swim team, gets straight A's. The doctors say there's less than a 5% chance of recurrence at this point. I'd like to meet him sometime. He's actually here tonight, sir, helping with the coat check. It was his idea. He wanted to give back too. Robert nodded, making his decision. He finished his scotch and set the glass down firmly on his desk. All right, Tom, let's go back to your party. You have an auction to start. Tom hesitated. What would you like me to tell the guests about your presence, sir? Robert straightened his tie and smoothed down his rumpled suit jacket. Tell them the truth, that I came home early and discovered something remarkable happening in my house. He paused, and tell them that I'll be matching every donation made tonight. Dollar for dollar. The buzz of conversation in the grand hall quieted as Robert and Tom emerged from the study. Robert could feel the eyes of every guest following them as they made their way through the crowd. Tom looked composed again, but Robert noticed he was walking more stiffly than usual, shoulders tense. They approached the small stage where the display chart stood, showing the fundraising progress. 70% of the $1 million goal was already highlighted. Tom stepped up to the microphone, cleared his throat, and addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. As you've noticed, we have an unexpected guest tonight. He gestured toward Robert. Mr. Kensington has returned from his business trip earlier than anticipated. A murmur went through the crowd. Robert could read the concern on their faces. Was the event being shut down? Would they be asked to leave? Mr. Kensington has asked to say a few words. Tom continued, stepping back from the microphone. Robert H. Adiant planned on speaking, but he recognized the opportunity Tom was giving him. He stepped forward, straightened his tie, and faced the sea of strangers in his home. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady despite his lingering jet lag. "I must admit this is not what I expected to find when I returned home tonight." A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience. "I've just been speaking with Tom, learning about the incredible work you've all been supporting these past 5 years. $3 million raised for the Children's Hospital. That's remarkable." Robert paused, looking around the room at the guests who were now watching him intently. "My wife has apparently been keeping a secret from me," he continued with a small smile. "Not just any secret, but one of the most meaningful things happening in our home. I'm learning that while I've been focused on building my company, she's been focused on building something far more important: hope for children fighting for their lives." He gestured to the display of photographs near the stage. "I just spent the last 15 minutes seeing the impact of your generosity. New medical equipment, treatment programs, family support services. As a businessman, I appreciate efficiency, and I'm impressed that every dollar raised here goes directly to helping these children." Robert took a deep breath. "So I've made a decision. The fundraiser will certainly continue tonight, but I'd like to add something to it." He looked at Tom, who was watching him with curiosity. "I will personally match dollar for dollar every donation made here tonight." Gasps and whispers spread across the room. Dr. Wilson, standing near the front, brought her hand to her mouth in shock. "That includes admission tickets already purchased. Auction items, wine purchases, everything. If you raise $1 million tonight as planned, that will become $2 million. Spontaneous applause erupted. Robert held up his hand for quiet. "There's one condition." The room fell silent again. "I want to be included from now on. No more secrets. This event happens in my home. It should have my full support." He stepped back from the microphone, nodding to Tom to take over again. The applause was deafening this time. Tom looked genuinely moved as he approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, with Mr. Kensington's incredible matching pledge, I encourage you all to bid generously on our auction items. The silent auction will begin now in the East Wing, and our live auction will commence in 30 minutes. As Tom directed the guests toward the auction areas, Dr. Wilson approached Robert with an outstretched hand. "Mr. Kensington, I hardly know what to say. Your generosity is overwhelming." Robert shook her hand. "I'm only following the example set by my wife and by Tom, though I'm curious, why didn't anyone tell me about this before?" Dr. Wilson looked slightly uncomfortable. "I was under the impression you were aware but preferred not to be involved directly. Mrs. Kensington always said you were supportive but extremely busy with your company." "I see," Robert said, trying not to let his hurt show. Was that really how Lisa portrayed him to others? Too busy and important to care about charity? A young man in a server's uniform approached them tentatively. He was tall and thin, maybe 15 or 16, with a slight awkwardness to his movements that suggested he was still growing into his height. "Excuse me," he said. "Tom asked if I could show Mr. Kensington the auction items." Robert realized this must be Alex, Tom's son, the cancer survivor. "You must be Alex," Robert said, extending his hand. "I'm Robert Kensington." The boy's handshake was firm despite his nervousness. "Yes, sir. It's nice to meet you. I work in your house sometimes." "With my dad?" Robert smiled. "I hear you're quite the swimmer." Alex looked surprised that Robert knew this detail. "Yes, sir. Butterfly is my best stroke." "Mine too when I was younger," Robert said. It was true. He'd been on his college swim team, though he hadn't been in a pool in years now. "Too busy with work. Always too busy. Would you show me these auction items?" Robert asked. "And maybe tell me a bit about your experience at the hospital?" As they walked toward the East Wing, Alex gradually became more comfortable. He pointed out various auction items: luxury vacation packages, sports memorabilia, jewelry, artwork, explaining which items had been popular in previous years. "This painting always gets the highest bids," Alex said, gesturing to a colorful landscape by a well-known local artist. "Last year it went for $30,000. "It's beautiful," Robert agreed. "Do you like art?" "I got into it during my treatments," Alex explained. "The hospital has an art therapy program. When you're stuck in bed for weeks, it gives you something to focus on besides being sick." They stopped in front of a display that was different from the others. Instead of luxury items, this table featured children's artwork. Bright, hopeful paintings, clearly done by young hands. These are from current patients, Alex explained quietly. They're usually the most meaningful items in the auction. People pay thousands for them, knowing exactly where the money is going. Robert studied the paintings. Each had a small card with the child's first name, age, and type of cancer. Michael, age 8, leukemia. Penny, age 6, brain tumor. David, age 4, neuroblastoma. This one, Alex said, pointing to a colorful painting of what looked like a superhero, is by my friend Ben. He's having a bone marrow transplant next week. Robert looked at the painting more closely. The superhero wore a hospital gown instead of a cape. Is he going to be okay? Robert asked. Alex's face grew serious. They think so. The new treatment protocols have a really good success rate. That's why this year's fundraiser is so important. The new wing will double the number of transplant beds. As they continued through the displays, Robert met more people connected to the hospital. Doctors, nurses, parents of patients. Each had a story. Each expressed gratitude for the fundraiser. A mother with tired eyes told him how her daughter had been diagnosed with a rare form of cancer 2 years ago. The clinical trial funded by last year's event saved her life, she said simply. She's in remission now. A pediatric nurse explained how the new equipment purchased with the fundraiser money had reduced treatment times by half. The children spend less time in pain. That means everything. By the time they circled back to the main hall, Robert felt both humbled and troubled. All of this had been happening in his home for years, and he'd had no idea. Lives had been changed, children had been saved, and he'd been completely disconnected from it. The live auction was about to begin. Guests were taking their seats in rows of chairs that had been set up facing the stage. Robert spotted Tom conferring with the auctioneer, going over last-minute details. "Thank you for the tour, Alex," Robert said. The boy nodded. "Thank you for supporting the hospital, Mr. Kensington. It really makes a difference." He hesitated, then added, "And thanks for not being mad at my dad. He was really worried when he saw you." Robert smiled. "Your dad has done something remarkable here. I'm glad I found out about it, even if it was by accident." As Alex went to help with the auction seating, Robert found himself alone for a moment. He pulled out his phone and dialed Lisa's number. It was late, but he needed to hear her voice. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding groggy. "Robert, aren't you in Singapore?" "I came home early," he said. "Surprise." "Oh," she sounded instantly more alert. "Where are you?" "At the house?" "Yes, I'm at the house. In the middle of a charity fundraiser for the children's hospital, apparently." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Robert, I can explain." "Why didn't you tell me, Lisa?" he asked quietly. "All these years, why keep it a secret?" He could hear her sigh. "I didn't think you'd be interested, honestly. You're always so focused on work, on the next deal. Whenever I mentioned charity events in the past, you always had an excuse not to attend." Her words stung because they contained truth. "I'm sorry if I gave you that impression," Robert said. "But this isn't just any charity event. This is something happening in our home. Something that matters to you. I should have known about it." "You're right," Lisa admitted. "I should have told you." Are you angry?" Robert watched as Tom took the stage to start the live auction. The first item was a week at a luxury ski chalet, donated by one of the hospital board members. "No," he said finally. "I'm not angry. I'm just wondering what else I've been missing while I've been so focused on making money." "Does this mean you're shutting down the fundraiser?" Lisa asked, concern in her voice. "Actually, I just pledged to match every donation made tonight." "We might raise $2 million, Robert?" She sounded genuinely shocked. That's incredible. "It's the least I can do," he said. "We'll talk more when you get home. I think I have some catching up to do." As he hung up, the auctioneer called out, "Sold. For $45,000. The crowd applauded as the ski chalet package found its new owner. Robert slipped into a seat in the back row. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about business deals or company valuations. Instead, he was wondering about the children in those photographs, the families waiting for treatments, and how a man who worked for him had created something so meaningful right under his nose. The next auction item was announced, a collection of fine wines selected from his own cellar. Robert smiled to himself and raised his hand to bid. By midnight, the energy in the grand hall remained electric despite the late hour. The live auction had just concluded with a final bid of $75,000 for a private yacht cruise, donated by one of Robert's business associates. The auctioneer, a charismatic man with a booming voice, announced the total raised so far, $1.2 million, before Robert's matching pledge. Applause erupted throughout the room. People stood clapping and cheering. Tom looked stunned as he stared at the tally board, which now displayed well over their original goal. Dr. Wilson wiped tears from her eyes as she joined Tom on stage. "With Mr. Kensington's matching pledge," she announced, her voice cracking with emotion, "that's $2.4 million for the Children's Cancer Wing. This will allow us to complete the project 6 months ahead of schedule. That means hundreds of children will receive treatment sooner than we ever dreamed possible." Robert sat in the back row, watching it all unfold. The expression on Tom's face made his impulsive matching pledge worth every penny. The man looked like he couldn't quite believe what was happening. This event that had started as a small gesture of gratitude had grown into something transformative. As the formal part of the evening concluded, guests began to mingle again. The jazz quartet resumed playing, and waitstaff circulated with champagne for a toast. Robert found himself surrounded by people wanting to thank him, to shake his hand, to tell him their connection to the hospital. A gentleman in his 60s gripped Robert's hand firmly. "My granddaughter received treatment there last year," he said. "She's 7 now, cancer-free. Your contribution tonight will help so many families like ours." Robert nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The reality of what his wealth could do, beyond acquiring more possessions, beyond growing his company, was hitting him in ways he hadn't expected. Tom approached with 2 champagne flutes, offering one to Robert. "I still can't believe this," he said quietly. "When I saw you on that balcony earlier, I thought I was about to lose my job." Robert chuckled, taking the champagne. "I thought I was about to fire you," he admitted. "Funny how things turn out." They clinked glasses gently. Tom took a small sip, then asked hesitantly, "May I ask what changed your mind? What made you decide to support the fundraiser instead of shutting it down?" Robert considered the question. "The photographs," he said finally. "The children in those photographs, and the way you spoke about your son. I realized this wasn't just some social event happening in my house, it was something that mattered. Something real." Tom nodded. "It is real. Every dollar raised tonight will change lives." He glanced at his watch. "The event usually winds down around 1. We'll have everything cleaned up and back to normal by morning." "Don't worry about that," Robert said. "Take whatever time you need." As Tom moved away to check on the cleanup arrangements, Robert found a quiet corner and pulled out his phone. He had several missed calls and texts from his executive team in Singapore. Questions about the deal, issues that needed his input. Just a day ago, he would have considered them urgent. Now they seemed distant, less important somehow. Instead of returning the business calls, he opened his photo gallery and scrolled through recent pictures. There were dozens of shots from business meetings, corporate events, and industry conferences. But he had to scroll back months to find any photos of his family. The last picture of his daughter Zoe was from Christmas, nearly 9 months ago. Had he really been that disconnected? A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Kensington?" Robert looked up to see Alex standing there, still in his server's uniform but with the bow tie loosened. "My dad said I should thank you personally before I head home," the boy said. "No need for thanks," Robert replied, pocketing his phone. "I'm glad I could help." Alex shifted his weight from one foot to another. "Can I ask you something?" When Robert nodded, he continued, "Why didn't you know about the fundraiser? I mean, it's your house." The directness of youth. Robert smiled ruefully. "I travel a lot for business. I'm not home much. And when I am home, I guess I don't pay as much attention as I should." Alex seemed to consider this. "My dad says you're a really important businessman. That you run a big tech company." "That's right. Is that why you're gone so much? Because you have to work all the time?" Robert found himself unexpectedly touched by the simple question. "I thought I had to," he said honestly. "I've always believed that success meant working harder than everyone else, being available 24/7, putting the company first." "My dad works hard too," Alex said. "But he never missed my swim meets, even when I was in treatment. He said some things are too important to miss." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. How many of Zoe's school events had he missed over the years? How many family dinners had he skipped for urgent business calls? "Your dad sounds like a wise man," Robert said quietly. Alex nodded. He is. He says you've been a good boss, though, that you pay better than any of his friends' employers and that you're fair. I'm glad to hear that. Robert paused, then asked, "What about you? What do you want to do when you're older?" "I want to be a doctor," Alex said without hesitation. "An oncologist, that's a cancer doctor. I want to help kids like me. That's a wonderful goal." "It's because of Dr. Chen," Alex explained. "She was my oncologist. She never made me feel scared, even when things were really bad. She always told me the truth, but in a way that made me feel like I could handle it." His expression grew serious. "Not everyone made it. My friend Ryan died during my second round of chemo, but Dr. Chen was there for all of us, even the ones who didn't make it." Robert was struck by the maturity in the boy's voice. At 15, Alex had faced mortality in ways Robert never had, despite being more than 3 times his age. "Well," Robert said, "if you ever need help with medical school tuition, you let me know." Alex's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" "Consider it an investment in the future." As the boy thanked him and hurried off to help with cleanup, Robert found himself thinking about investments in a way he never had before. He'd always measured returns in dollars and cents and stock prices and company valuations. But what about the return on investing in people, in causes that saved lives? He wandered through his own home, seeing it with new eyes. The marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and priceless art had always felt like symbols of his success. Tonight they had served a greater purpose, providing a backdrop for an event that would help hundreds of sick children. Near the entrance to the East Wing, Robert stopped at a display he hadn't noticed before. It was a memory wall with photographs from previous year's fundraisers. There was Tom, 5 years younger, standing with a much smaller Alex who was clearly in treatment. Thin, pale, no hair. In another photo, a group of children in hospital gowns stood in front of new medical equipment, a large ribbon being cut by one of the young patients. Year by year, the photos showed the growth of the event. More attendees, bigger donations, expanded hospital facilities, and in several of the photos, Lisa stood smiling alongside Tom and the hospital staff. Robert's wife had been part of this all along while he had been completely oblivious. "She comes every year," Tom said, appearing beside him. "She's been one of our biggest supporters from the beginning." "I had no idea," Robert admitted. "Mrs. Kensington suggested using the house that first year when I mentioned wanting to do something for the hospital. She handles all the arrangements when you're traveling." "And you really replace all the wine that gets used?" Robert asked, remembering their earlier conversation. Tom smiled. "Every bottle," Mrs. Kensington insisted. "She said you might not notice the event, but you'd definitely notice if vintages went missing from your collection." Robert laughed. "She's right about that." As the last guest began to depart, Robert found himself at the front door alongside Tom and Dr. Wilson, thanking people for coming. It felt strange to be playing host at an event he hadn't known about until hours ago, but somehow right. Dr. Wilson turned to him as the final guests left. "Mr. Kensington, we would be honored to have you tour the hospital sometime, to see firsthand what your generosity will help us accomplish." "I'd like that," Robert said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "Perhaps next Wednesday," she suggested. "We're having a small ceremony to break ground on the new wing. It would mean a lot to have you there." Robert hesitated. Wednesday was the day he was supposed to present quarterly results to his board of directors. It was one of the most important meetings of the year, one he had never missed. "I'll be there," he said firmly. "What time?" After Dr. Wilson left, only the cleanup crew remained, efficiently restoring the house to its normal state. Robert checked his watch, nearly 2 a.m. He should be exhausted after the long flight and the emotional evening, but he felt strangely energized. "Tom, when does your shift normally end?" he asked. "I usually finish around 6 p.m., sir, but on evenings like this I stay until everything is back in order. When you're done here, take tomorrow off. Paid, of course." "That's very generous, sir, but it's not necessary." "It is to me," Robert insisted. "You've created something extraordinary here, something I should have known about and supported from the beginning. Take the day with your family." As Tom thanked him and returned to supervising the cleanup, Robert headed upstairs to his bedroom. He paused on the landing, looking back at the grand hall below, where strangers had gathered in his home to change the world in ways he hadn't even been aware of. He had some phone calls to make tomorrow. His executive team needed to be informed that he would not be presenting at the board meeting on Wednesday. His assistant needed to clear his calendar for a hospital tour. And most importantly, he needed to have a long conversation with Lisa about what else he might have been missing while he'd been busy chasing success. 1 year later, the sun shone brightly as Robert stood on the stage erected in front of the newly completed Children's Cancer Treatment Wing. A large red ribbon stretched across the entrance, awaiting the ceremonial cutting. Behind him sat rows of chairs filled with hospital staff, donors, patients, and their families. The crowd was much larger than he had anticipated. At least 300 people had gathered for the dedication ceremony. And now, Dr. Wilson announced, "I'd like to invite Robert Kensington to say a few words before we officially open the new wing." Applause greeted Robert as he stepped up to the microphone. He adjusted his tie, not a power tie from his usual collection, but a colorful one covered in children's handprints, a gift from the young patients he'd come to know over the past year. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, looking out at the sea of faces. "1 year ago, I accidentally crashed a fundraiser in my own home." Laughter rippled through the audience, especially from those who had been present that night. "I walked in thinking someone was taking advantage of my absence. I walked out with my eyes open to something extraordinary happening right under my nose." Robert gestured to the new building behind him. "This wing represents so much more than additional hospital beds and medical equipment. It represents what we can accomplish when we come together for something bigger than ourselves." He spotted Tom in the third row, sitting beside Alex, who was now 16 and looked healthier and stronger than ever. Next to them sat Lisa, who gave Robert an encouraging smile. Their daughter Zoe was beside her, home from college for the occasion. "I've been a businessman my entire adult life," Robert continued. "I built a company, made a fortune, and thought that was success. I measured everything in profits and losses, in quarterly reports and stock prices." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "What I've learned this past year is that I was using the wrong metrics. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in impact, in lives changed, in hope created." Robert gestured to a group of children sitting in the front row, current and former patients, some with medical masks, some in wheelchairs, others appearing perfectly healthy, but carrying the invisible scars of their battles. "These children and their families have taught me more about courage, resilience, and what really matters than I learned in 30 years of business meetings." In the months following that fateful fundraiser night, Robert had gradually restructured his life. He'd appointed a COO to handle daily operations at his company, reducing his own work week from 70 hours to 40. He'd established the Kensington Family Foundation with a $50 million endowment to support pediatric cancer research. And most significantly, he'd become a regular volunteer at the hospital, reading to young patients once a week. This new wing contains 24 additional treatment rooms, a state-of-the-art research laboratory, and something I'm particularly proud of, a dedicated space for families to stay while their children receive treatment. Robert smiled at Tom. That particular feature was suggested by someone who knows firsthand how important it is for parents to remain close to their children during treatment. The original fundraising goal for the new wing had been $5 million. The final amount raised was over $12 million, allowing for additions and improvements nobody had initially thought possible. "I'd like to thank everyone who contributed to making this dream a reality. The donors who gave generously, the hospital staff who provided invaluable input on what was needed, the construction team who completed this project ahead of schedule and under budget." Robert's voice grew more emotional. "And most of all, I want to thank the person who started it all, the man who turned my home into a house of hope while I wasn't looking." He gestured for Tom to stand. The audience applauded loudly as Tom rose, looking embarrassed but proud. 5 years ago, Tom organized a small fundraiser to thank the hospital that saved his son's life. He never expected it to grow into this. But great things often have humble beginnings. Sometimes the biggest changes in our lives start with one person deciding to make a difference. After the ceremony concluded and the ribbon was cut, guests toured the new facility. Robert walked through the hallways alongside Dr. Wilson, noting the thoughtful touches throughout the space, colorful murals on the walls, comfortable seating areas for families, natural light flooding through large windows. Each treatment room had been designed with input from former patients to reduce the fear and sterility typically associated with hospitals. "You've created something truly special here," Dr. Wilson said. This facility will change thousands of lives in the coming years. I just provided the funding, Robert replied. The real vision came from your medical team and from families like Tom's who knew what was needed. They stopped at the entrance to the family stay area, a section of the wing with hotel-style rooms where parents could sleep while remaining close to their children during treatment. A plaque beside the entrance read, "The Alexandra Wing, in honor of all parents who never leave their children's side." Alexandra was my wife's middle name, Robert explained, his voice soft. She would have been proud to see this. Dr. Wilson squeezed his arm gently. She knew that Lisa had been the one to first welcome Tom's fundraising idea years ago, creating the foundation for everything that followed. Later, as the formal event wound down, Robert found himself in the hospital garden with Tom, Lisa, and Zoe. Alex had gone off with some of the younger patients to show them the new game room. I still can't believe how much things have changed in a year, Tom said, shaking his head in wonder. All because I came home early from a business trip, Robert laughed. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my meeting in Singapore had run the full schedule. I would have been terrified when you eventually found out about the fundraiser, Tom admitted. And I would have been furious that you'd kept it from me, Robert countered. Lisa slipped her hand into her husband's. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about it sooner. I really did think you wouldn't be interested. You weren't entirely wrong, Robert acknowledged. The old me probably would have seen it as a distraction, an inefficient use of resources. I needed that shock of discovery to really see what was happening. Zoe, who had been quiet during most of the event, finally spoke up. Dad, I'm thinking of changing my major. Oh? Robert had been thrilled when Zoe was accepted to study business at his alma mater. To what? Pre-med. I want to become a pediatric oncologist. Robert felt a surge of pride. When did you decide this? After spending time here during winter break, watching those kids fight so hard. I want to help them, the way Dr. Chen helped Alex. Tom looked at Zoe with appreciation. It's a challenging path, but so worthwhile. I think it's a wonderful idea, Robert said, surprising himself with how genuinely he meant it. A year ago, he might have tried to steer her back toward business, arguing that she could donate to hospitals rather than work in them. Now he understood the difference between writing checks and being personally involved. As they walked back toward the new wing for the final reception, Robert noticed a small boy sitting alone on a bench. He recognized him as one of the current patients, Dylan, age 7, fighting a rare form of bone cancer. The treatments had taken his hair and much of his energy, but not his spirit. You folks go ahead, Robert said to his family. I'll catch up. He sat down beside Dylan, who was watching a butterfly flutter among the garden flowers. Hey there, Robert said. What did you think of the new wing? Dylan looked up. It's cool. The game room has all the newest stuff. That's good to hear. We wanted to make sure it had everything kids would want. My mom says you paid for a lot of it, Dylan said matter-of-factly. That you're super rich, Robert smiled. I've been fortunate in business. If you're so rich, how come you spend so much time here reading to us kids? Don't you have important stuff to do? The question caught Robert off guard with its directness. He thought about it for a moment before answering. I used to think my business was the most important thing in my life, he said honestly. I thought success meant making more money, having a bigger house, closing bigger deals. And now? Dylan asked. Now I realize that the most valuable thing I have isn't money, it's time. And how I choose to spend that time matters more than anything else. Dylan seemed to consider this. My dad says the same thing. He works 2 jobs, but he always comes to the hospital every day, even if it's just for an hour. Your dad sounds like a wise man. He is, Dylan agreed. He says being there is what counts. Robert nodded, looking across the garden at the new hospital wing with its large windows reflecting the afternoon sun. In the glass, he could see the reflection of himself sitting with this small, brave boy. Behind them, he saw the shadowy reflection of the crowd inside. Doctors, nurses, families, donors, all part of a community he hadn't known existed a year ago. Being there is exactly what counts, Robert agreed, offering his hand to Dylan. Come on, I hear they have ice cream at the reception, and I happen to know they ordered chocolate chip, which I'm told is your favorite. Dylan's face lit up as he took Robert's hand. How'd you know that? I pay attention to important things now, Robert said with a smile, leading the boy toward the celebration of something much bigger than himself, a future he helped create, but couldn't have imagined a year ago, when he came home early, and his life changed forever.